Today on the show, I'm glad to welcome two guests, an old friend and a new one, starting with my partner, Philip Ideson. Hi, Phil.
Hey, Kelly.
Glad you're here today.
Yeah, it's I enjoy being on the other side of the microphone and being asked some of the questions rather than presenting. It's a lot more laid back over here.
I know I'm taking all the heat today.
Mm-hmm.
But we're also glad to have with us a recent guest that we're welcoming back, Natasha Gurevich. Natasha is the former CPO of Nike and former VP of Global Procurement at Salesforce, just to name two of her former roles. Natasha is also the founder and CEO of Candor Procurement, and we are very excited to say that she will be speaking on the main stage in Studio A at Catalyst LA, our first in-person event taking place on May 6th in Los Angeles. So hi, Natasha. Thank you so much for joining Phil and I today.
Absolutely. Hi, Kelly. Hi, Phil. I'm very excited about today's conversation and most importantly, to the event that it will be leading to on May 6th, Catalyst LA.
Yeah. And I want to jump in and say I'm thrilled you joined us, Natasha. You know, when we started to put together the idea of Catalyst, you're really the first person that sprung to mind. You know, we've worked together a lot in the past and so happy that you accepted the invite and the rest is history. We'll talk a little bit about that today.
Brilliant. Love it.
And as a matter of fact, we sort of got ahead of ourselves and we were chatting about this a little bit before I hit record today. Natasha, what is it that made you so enthusiastic to jump in and get involved with Catalyst LA?
I really got inspired by Phil's vision of creating an intimate event of procurement professionals so we can really openly, in a knowledge-based way, to geek out about procurement, right? Because the procurement space changes so fast.
Mm-hmm.
And on one hand, we are all a little bit concerned that in some areas progress is slow and hard to come. On another hand, super fast development of technological solution impacting procurement space is coming to us in massive waves, and our readiness from procurement organizational perspective and mindset is not necessarily there yet. So how can we marry preparedness, excitement from everything what's changing, and have a truly open discussion about what we're experiencing? That really, Phil infected me with the idea of having this open and honest conversation on the spot.
Well, and Phil, maybe let me pull you in there too, because we've talked since the very beginning about wanting Catalyst LA to be really unique, but not just to be an event, to be an experience. And clearly the way that we've talked about that, if we're pulling in people with backgrounds and experience like Natasha's, we must be onto something. But when you're sharing your vision for the event with people, where do you tend to focus?
I think I try and focus on, I think one thing that Natasha said really insightful, I just wanted to focus on for a second, and that's maybe the speed of change is different from our ability to adopt change. And you know how interesting it is to kind of balance those two things, because with that acceleration of the pace of change occurring, we're only going to get further and further and further and further away the longer that we wait. It doesn't mean we have to rush into things, but it means that there's definitely urgency. You know, where I talk a lot about to people when I'm talking to them about coming and joining us at Catalyst, it's around that collaboration. You know, we're all on this journey in procurement with an unknown destination. And, you know, there's lots of experimentation that's going on across companies of all shapes and sizes by a number of like really curious CPOs and heads of procurement and people that are looking after centers of excellence and transformation leads. And, you know, let's try and bring some of those experiences together so we all learn together. You know, so we all learn from mistakes that we're making together, or we're all inspired by other people's experiments, and ultimately leaving the conversation not really just with a bunch of high-level insights, but you know, what's the thing that I can go and do tomorrow? And that's really what I'm trying to get out of it is, you know, let's let's talk about what's working and what's not, but also let's leave with a plan for action, because that's really, really important. You don't have a plan for action, it's really entertainment. And procurement conferences are not known to be, the top of the entertainment pile sometimes. So it's truly important that we all learn from each other and go away and have something that we can put into practice, or at least experiment with once we leave.
And I think that's a valid point. Certainly there's a lot of procurement conferences. There's a lot of procurement, different styles of in-person events. And every individual is going to, like some things about attending things in person, right? Some parts of that appeal to different people more than others. Natasha, if I can get some free advice from you based on the in-person events that you've either attended or spoken at, what do you think the best events do well, or even what are some of the things that the best events not do? Are there any things that you think we should definitely try to emphasize? Are there any things we should stay away from? What would you recommend based on events you've been to?
I hear very often from the attendees that thank you for giving practical tips. And especially when we're talking about transformation, which is a big concept and a big word, which is often overused and misunderstood. Like, what constitutes transformation? What has to be true to call it true transformation versus operational changes or good business hygiene? Those practical tips, like how to approach certain things step by step, or what to be aware of, or how to sell your vision to the CFO, or how to bring CIO as your partner on board. I think that practical tips and tricks and stories from, I have experienced the following, and this is how I got out of it. People appreciate it very much. As I shared earlier, that Phil's idea of smaller group of CPOs and procurement professionals was very attractive to me, because it's this discussion that builds true network. Because many procurement leaders have access to a lot of many different sources that have market intel and benchmark and best practices. But it is through live conversation with your peers that we very often can find solutions to our real problems. I would say that these two key points, that practicality and a live discussion, and this building neurons, networking neurons that will fire at the right time, I find this to be key components of a successful gatherings.
Yeah. I actually think your point is exceptionally well taken, since transformation and operating models are at the center of this. Because it's one thing to offer people inspiration or ideas or even storytelling. What I always think about, though, is that moment where you're full of energy and you're really enthusiastic because of something you've just learned or a story you've just heard. And then for me, I sit down with my AOP clipboard. Somebody else might sit down with a digital to-do list, and you think, okay, I want to make this happen for me. What is the first task I'm going to put on your list? And nothing comes to mind, right? So it's like you can have that inspiration, but if you can't action it, if you can't even think specifically about, okay, let's get detailed about transformation, I think that makes it very difficult to follow through. And you have an exceptionally good way of talking about transformation when you do. You actually describe it as a balancing act. Why do you think a balancing act is the best way to discuss what transformation means and what it should look like?
During transformation, balancing acts happening on many different levels, right? You're coming into an organization with a new agenda, with a new vision, with a new strategy. So you have to balance that new vision and old habits. You have to balance between how positively it will impact the business on a long term, and how impactful transformational steps will be for people on the short term. And that impact will maybe perceived as negative impact because it will take people, it's additional pressure and time commitment and tasks that people will have to focus on. Very often you come with transformational agenda, you describing the vision, and people believe in vision and they're excited about potential outcome, but they are frantic because a procurement traditionally is understaffed and it takes a lot of efforts to keep the lights on as is. And here is you, visionary leader, trying to paint bright and brilliant future, and everyone is that, yes, that sounds great, it's a good thing to do, but how are we going to get there if I'm already working extensive hours? So it's a balancing act between requiring today's investment of time, resources, technology, buy-ins versus tomorrow's benefits. And they are a little bit elusive because they're a little bit far ahead and far in advance. And you need to kind of like marry this reality. It's how to sell and how to buy, right? And so it's a balancing act from many different perspectives.
Yeah. Phil, I think when Natasha describes the feeling in response to the idea of transformation as frantic, I mean, that is the word, right? You feel it in your gut. You might be excited, but it doesn't necessarily all feel positive. Why does the issue with certainly resources, right? You and I have talked about doing more with less. Why does the need for transformation, plus the fact that procurement is highly unlikely to get either more headcount or maybe even more investment to make it happen, make our control over the operating model such a key part of making that transformation possible?
I think, when you think about operating models, and we've talked a lot about operating models, you're essentially choosing how you are spending the money that you have at your disposal to run your procurement business within a business. We always talk about, thinking of ourselves as a business within a business. Where are you going to put the scarce resources that you have access to develop a procurement capability? And, every decision that is made around the cost to serve is based on the operating model that you choose. And so, if resources are constrained, if cash, is we're not blessed with abundant cash to invest in procurement transformation, then you've got to figure out, okay, where do I pull from? So, and what are the trade-offs that I make? And that all goes into the model, but not just the model, but the technology and kind of that connection of technology and people, which is what's really changing. I think we've all worked in procurement for so many years, and we've all talked about, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could do X, Y, and Z, whatever that may be, without really the ability to do so. And so now you have this pace of technological change, which is probably beyond what most of us can really comprehend at the moment in terms of what is going to be possible. And then that just starts to give you a reason why you can go back to the drawing board and really start from the beginning and start with, okay, what should our model look like? And I think that's why, at least for us in terms of how we're designing Catalyst, why operating model is so front and center.
Yeah. How much change does procurement need to be willing to carry out for it to be considered transformational, right? Because you can make little incremental adjustments that are definitely easier, lower risk, more palatable, but also not transformation. So how can we sort of calibrate ourselves to know if transformation is truly the goal? What level of change are we really talking about making in order to get, I guess, also that corresponding transformation in terms of impact and results?
So I definitely love Natasha's perspective on this as a more recent kind of practitioner as I am, but I think that some of it comes down to maturity level of your organization. When I mean maturity, what I really mean is what are kind of the stages of advancement that your current procurement organization is, because you may be at that stage where you're just really looking to take things to the next level, you already have a really good foundation. Or it might be that you're starting at the beginning. And I don't necessarily want to scare people with the idea of, you're going from a 3 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10 overnight, because I think that small incremental change on a regular basis adds up, it compounds. And so there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I think about it as much about vision than it is what's the step, like what's your vision for where the future of procurement is going to be. And then you can kind of assess where you are today. And that might not need a big leap. It might just need like incremental change, or it might need a big transformation. I've always hesitated to call things transformation because, we go on this cycle of 3-year transformations, and then you go and do another one. And then everybody that you're trying to get buy-in for that transformation as well. I was just told I was doing a transformation 3 years ago.
Yeah.
What's going to be different this time? But on the other hand, there are so many things that are different this time that I don't think you can. I think you certainly have an excuse to call it transformation because there are so many different changes that we couldn't have done or thought about a few years ago.
Yeah. What do you think, Natasha? I mean, when you think about, certainly there's the vision element, right? How disruptive is your vision for the future? What is the maturity of your organization, as Phil said? But how much are you planning to adjust? How do you think about the level of change associated with transformation?
Kelly, we'll talk about it in greater level of details on May 6th. So I don't, I'll leave more details to the Catalyst delay itself when we can have kind of like exchange with our peers on that. But I would say maybe first step is to determine whether transformation is needed. Specifically, I'm talking within procurement. And the litmus test is to have a very deep look into comprehensive overall enterprise strategy and enterprise readiness, and see if procurement can support it. Because transformation can come at very different points of organizational development, right? Sometimes going from underground to the ground level, that's a transformation, even though you may have nothing. So transformation is not necessarily qualitative improvement of what you have. Building off when you have nothing to something, that is already part of transformation. And that's greater transformation for organization than just for procurement. Because when you're just building procurement, let's say if the company with a revenue of, let's say, $700-800 million, which is a pretty significant revenue, and let's say the spend would fall somewhere between 2 to 250 million, it is possible that this spend is supported by 2 or 3 procurement professionals. I know I've seen this. I've seen these companies, right? They may not have procurement policy. They may not have technology solution. They certainly don't have any operating model, because when you have 2-3 people, operating model just is not relevant. And what it creates quite significant duplication, redundancies, and waste for the businesses. So when you realize that, oh my God, we have like 57 agreements with Marriott, and we have 4 different instances of licenses for Slack, and our contingent workforce is coming from a gazillion of different sources, you realize that you have to address this and this and this and that. And when you have these multiple points that you have to address operationally, commercially, from technology perspective, from compliance perspective, that you don't have any gates that are in any fashion controlled to bring on new suppliers, new providers, you realize that that if it's not just, we need to bring the discipline of creating category strategies and reviewing it with our stakeholders on an annual basis. That's a good business hygiene. That's a good improvement to bring into procurement, to move it from tactical to and transactional to more strategic. But when you are looking at the whole spectrum of, we need to adjust our policies, we need to adjust our compliance, we need to adjust our supplier onboarding process, we need to adjust our technology, our DPO and DSO, the payment terms of collecting cash and dispersing cash. If that is out of balance, then you're looking at the full-blown transformation, right? Because you will have to impact organization on many different levels. So transformation is not just how it's going to impact procurement. First and foremost, how it's going to impact the entire enterprise through the efforts that will be happening from procurement standpoint, not even in procurement organization, but what will be happening with procurement function.
I think that's a really interesting point, because certainly for the three of us, it's hard to escape the idea of looking at transformation from anything other than a procurement perspective. But Natasha, based on your experience, how might the CFO look at procurement transformation differently than the CPO does?
Oh, they look at it very differently. And the best way for CPO to get attention of the CFO is don't talk about procurement transformation, is talk about the impact that the actions related to function of procuring, of buying goods and services, how positively it will impact organization. What may potentially lead to improving cash flow? What can lead to reducing risk? What can lead to how transformation will impact speed to market? Because if you come to the CMO and you talk with the CMO about procurement transformation, they're gonna start inspecting their nails very very quickly, and they're gonna lose the interest to whatever you have to say, because it's not relevant to them. But if you talk about speed to market, if you talk about how move from 4,000 agencies to 400 agencies can help marketing professionals, how creating online single source solution for all promotional items, how it will protect the brand integrity. Once you start speaking with their language, you will get their attention. So if it's CMO, you talk about brand integrity, you talk about speed to market, you talk about the value of the brand, and with the CFO, you talk about cost of capital, cash flow, compliance. With the chief supply chain officer, you're talking about availability of and providing a supply, right?
Yeah.
They know the cost of the container to ship goods through the ocean, right? But what's important to them is that how can you provide capacity?
Yeah.
Talk about capacity, you get their attention.
And this, the focus on the stakeholder and it being a journey of partnerships throughout the business is something that was really important to us as we started to think about content at Catalyst as well, because I think too often a lot of us have been through where we kind of build our plan for the future of procurement, but probably too much in isolation without bringing the business along. And then you get to the end of the process and then you're starting to pitch to the business why this new way is going to be good for them, as opposed to actually kind of stepping back and starting with the stakeholders at the very beginning and getting buy-in to the vision to kind of go through every step of the journey with them. So at the end, it's an easy sell, or at least a much easier sell. And, I'm thrilled that we're going to be joined at Catalyst as well by one of your former colleagues at Nike, Anna Jenastal, who is a former CFO of marketing at Nike, to kind of have that conversation. So we'll get to hear in real time some of the, I don't want to say complaints, some of the frustrations of a CFO, but also some really good advice and tips. We talked about tips before about how can I really bring my CFO on the journey with me?
Yeah, this is probably one of my happiest moments when both Anna and you said yes for her to be on stage with me, because We will bring the real dynamic that existed between CPO, me, and her being CFO for marketing organization. So her working with procurement, having a finance leading role in marketing organization, and coming from EY with her consulting background, that makes her the right person to kind of like to bounce all these ideas. How could we make it work? Especially because our friendship had always been solid, but our professional connections had been thorny at times because I needed to do something that she didn't want us to do. Like,
Mm-hmm. The
surprise,
conflict.
surprise,
Yeah.
surprise, surprise. Marketing is not entirely instantly on board with what procurement wants to bring. And I purposely kind of like was thinking of her. And again, I'm super happy that she'll be joining because we'll make it real.
Yeah.
We'll make it real for procurement professionals sitting inside of the audience and trying to figure out, how do I break through? Because that is one of the main questions for procurement professionals. How do I sell internally? How do I break through resistance, misunderstanding, lack of interest, and just pure rejection?
And I also think, you talk about that relationship between you as former CPO, Anna as former CFO, and not just CFO of a marketing organization, which is hopefully raising red flags in the back of everybody's mind who's ever worked in procurement and attempted to even have a conversation with marketing. You're almost taking that "it can't be done" idea off the table, because if it can be done with a CFO who represents marketing, I mean, come up with another situation. Like, if it can be done there, is there really any place that it can't be done?
The biggest
That to me
skeptics.
seems like exactly that's
Yeah.
the hardest combination I have to
Yeah.
think to achieve. Now, to the point about who's going to be there, Phil, yes, we've put a ton of thought into venue. We've put a
Yeah.
ton of thought into the tone of conversation, but we've also put a ton of thought into who needs to be there. And that's both on stage, that is facilitating roundtables and mastermind sessions, but it's also who's attending. Why has it been so important to you from the outset to get the right attendee roles into the room,
Mhm.
whether it be sort of head of procurement or a very carefully selected +1?
Yeah, I think, as you said, really the folks who are in the room from a practitioner perspective, CPOs, heads of procurement, heads of sourcing and category management, those leading transformation programs, those leading digitization, leading center of excellence, and also, as you mentioned, kind of the +1, which is, we're inviting attendees to bring somebody from their team who will really be responsible for driving some of the implementation, because as we know from a CPO perspective, you may have the vision, but you're really reliant heavily on members of your team to go and do the execution, if you will. So it was important to have like a mix of both of those role types, and the reason is, I wanted to make sure that that it was that the folks in the room could all be of value to each other. We talked about the collaboration, really important, the networking that's really important. That I'd rather have a smaller audience of people who are really being challenged with the same challenges on a day-to-day basis than an event where perhaps those people are trying to kind of find some of their peers within a larger audience, and it's a little bit harder to have those conversations. And that's not to say that there isn't a place for some of those larger events, because 100% there's absolutely a place for those events in procurement. But with Catalyst, I just really wanted it to be about connection, about sharing experiences, and doing it with folks who have had similar experience levels, similar challenges on the table, similar questions that they may have of each other, because that's really where we're going to drive a lot of inspiration and insight.
Well, I think I even hear it in Natasha's points about messaging by function. When you talk to the CFO, you say this. When you talk to the CMO, you say that. When you talk maybe to the CIO, there's a different area of focus. And if you say the wrong things, absolutely, eyes are going to roll into the backs of heads. That is not entirely different from what category leads, sourcing managers, other people at different levels on the team might experience when they go into a sourcing project kickoff. If you're using the wrong terminology, if you're focusing on the wrong success metrics, it doesn't matter what level somebody is in, what function they work for. Absolutely, the yawning is going to start, followed by the eyes rolling, followed by the checking email to see what else is going on, right? Some other place in the company. I do think that messaging is such a huge part of what will hopefully make this event a success. Now, Phil, I know we have other conversations also coming up about Catalyst, but
Yeah.
given that Natasha and Anna will be such a big part of kicking this event off, I wonder if you might talk, and then Natasha, I'll pull you in on this as well, a little bit about, okay, here's the vision for the event. Here's what we really want to have happen. Nighttime of May 6th, you're exhausted, you're looking back on the event. What is going to be your sense of how successful that event was from an attendee standpoint?
Yeah, first of all, I'm looking forward to being able to finally sleep after the after the end of the event. I think, what does success look like? Success looks like attendees telling us that it was a valuable investment of their time. Because however much from a cost perspective it is to go to something like that, really the cost is time. It's an investment of people taking time out of that, and an opportunity cost of not being in the office, of traveling and however long that travel takes, and actually walking away with something that they can try on their teams, or being a little bit more inspired or informed about something that they weren't when they came, and they have a plan for action of how they're going to go and do something. How are they going to measure success or otherwise? How are they rethinking what, a part of their procurement operating model? Because, the goal isn't for everybody to walk away and say, like, I've had this whole new way of running procurement by coming here. It's probably going to be people coming and saying, I've got this challenge in this one area. How can I think differently about this one specific challenge, and having some action steps and some confidence in taking those action steps when they leave.
Yeah. And Natasha, you started us off today by talking about the fact that Phil's vision for this event, both in terms of content and also in terms of tone and outcomes, was really what won you over, not just to sign up to attend, which would have been wonderful in and of itself, but you've gone that much further and said, no, I will get up on stage and tell my story and share my experience and bring a former colleague from another function to help me do that. What would you advise people to think about? So they've heard us have this conversation. Maybe they're thinking, okay, is this the event for me? Can you talk a little bit more just about that decision-making on your part? What might you want people to think about to make that decision, like Phil is talking about, to make the investment of time, to hopefully not travel all too far to get to Los Angeles? What would you recommend people keep in mind when they're making the decision about how important this is in terms of them sort of keeping an eye on the big picture of what procurement can achieve?
I think it will be the right venue for those who have a lot of procurement dilemmas and not too many sources or vehicles that they constitute a safe zone. That's another benefit of having a small, kind of like hand-picked audience, is that it creates the safe environment where like my definition of success of the event would be that on May 7th, one of the attendees emails to another attendees with a question and ask to meet to brainstorm. And the recipient of that email says, absolutely. And that goes then from this recipient will become a sender on the dilemma that person will be dealing with. To procurement family is fairly small. There are very few people who feel and I don't know, right? In the procurement space among the CPOs. Recently, there was a list published of Procurement Magazine published 100 top CPOs. I was just going through and I'm like, I know 75% of
Yeah.
them. At least if I don't know them directly, I've heard their name. Or I know if I send them the message, they will recognize my name as a sender. And I think that whether you are an experienced CPO or a starting sourcing manager, if you have an opportunity to attend, please attend. If for nothing else, is to have a circle of trusted advisors who will provide you a perspective that is completely untainted. It's only tainted by their personal experience, but anything that comes out of our mouth it's tainted by our personal experience, right?
Yeah.
So there is no necessarily objectivity, but just knowing that there are a number of people who represent your safe zone to go in with your problem or dilemma, brainstorm about it, get out of the conversation something that is relevant to you, and having it and implementing it from practical perspective. I'd say that's probably how I, in 25 years, went from a temporary employee in procurement organization to the CPO, is because I was just shamelessly taking pieces of knowledge from everyone who I met, and I was integrating into my daily practices everything what I would find relevant and timely.
And Natasha, you've inspired me to think of one other success factor based on what you said, because creating a safe space is really important and really part of why we wanted to limit the attendees. I think that if attendees feel like they were comfortable enough to be vulnerable, I think that's really because from vulnerability, this is what Kelly and I talk all the time about, the CPOs that we truly connect with the most through all the different content channels and everything that we do are those that are open to be vulnerable. So they say they don't know where they're going or what the future is, or they're open to experimentation, they're open to new ideas. I think if we create an environment where people are comfortable and feel that it's, like you say, safe to be vulnerable, I think that's the best thing that we can possibly achieve.
Yeah, like you shared with me the list of attendees, and I saw Mark Zafra, Fanny Bollinger, Renan Borin. I worked with these people. I run my problems by them. They run theirs by me. We have a common language, and it doesn't come overnight. It got established over the years, and the years start today. So for someone, it will be the first gathering.
Yep.
For someone else, it will be number 25. But what we get out of it is exactly what we bring into it. If we find bravery to strike a conversation with someone we never met before, and just not necessarily strike conversations like, hi, my name is such and such, never met you before. Here is my $5 million dilemma. How can you that probably would be a bit too extreme on the brave side. But just starting the dialogue, getting to know people, getting connected, and sharing our thoughts, I think it will be a brilliant outcome.
And we have sessions planned where they can bring their $5 million dilemma to chat about that later in the day. So they'll get there eventually, maybe not just the first hello.
Well, if nothing else, it's going to be a great opportunity to join that powerful club. I love the way you talk about that, Natasha. So what I'm going to say in advance, thank you for coming and speaking. Thank you for inviting and bringing Anna with you. We are so looking forward to that session. And of course, thank you for joining us for this conversation today.
I'm very excited about the event, and I think it will be great. I hope to see a lot of familiar faces, and I hope to see a lot of new faces. And I am sure that everyone will get something out of it.
Absolutely. And Phil, of course, I would never not thank you. Thank you for being here also, and for turning your vision for Catalyst into something that people can actually register for. If people want to learn more about the event, there will be a link down in the show notes.
Yep.
At the very least, you can go to artofprocurement.com/calendar and find out more about Catalyst and the other events that we have going on. But we are very much hoping to hear from people who are interested and to get to see people's smiling faces on May 6th.
All right. And you can actually go directly to artofprocurement.com/catalyst as well. And that will take you straight there. So we look forward to seeing as many of you as possible on May the 6th.
Perfect. Well, then on that note, thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, everybody who listened in. We hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right.